November 10th, 1918. 3:37 in the morning. A shell crater in Belgium, 40 yards from the German line. Silas Winterhawk had not moved in 6 hours. His rifle rested on a shattered oak branch, his body pressed into frozen mud. His breath came in shallow, controlled intervals, each exhale calculated, each inhale measured. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he watched the German trenches, 400 yards away. His eyes never blinked, his muscles never shifted. To any observer, he would have appeared dead, frozen, part of the landscape. But Silas Winterhawk was very much alive, and he was hunting. In 11 hours the war would end. Armistice papers had been signed in a railway car in France. Word had reached the front lines yesterday. Soldiers on both sides knew the killing would stop at 11 o'clock this morning. But right now, at 3:37 in the morning, men were still dying. Silas could see movement in the German trench. An officer, tall, maybe 30 years old, examining a map by candlelight, exposed for perhaps 10 seconds. Most snipers would hesitate. The war was almost over. Why take another life when peace was hours away? Silas didn't hesitate. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from Lake Superior, from childhood, from a time before he understood what war meant. The deer doesn't know you're watching. Time means nothing to the hunter. You become part of the forest. You wait, and when the moment comes, you take the shot. Silas aimed, compensated for wind, adjusted for the slight downward angle. 400 yards in November cold meant the bullet would drop 22 inches. He squeezed the trigger. The Springfield rifle cracked through the frozen air. Through his scope, Silas watched the German officer fall. Clean, instant, no suffering. Kill number 547. The last man Silas Winterhawk would kill in the Great War. The last of 547 German soldiers who died without ever seeing who was shooting. The Germans had a name for him, Der Geist, the ghost. But they were wrong. Silas wasn't a ghost. He was something their military training had never prepared them for. Something that came from 10,000 years of Ojibwe tradition. Something his grandfather had taught him on the shores of Lake Superior when he was 8 years old. 3 principles, 3 words, 3 ancient teachings that would make Silas Winterhawk the most feared sniper on the Western Front. And in the next hour, you're going to learn exactly what those 3 principles were. How a 23-year-old fisherman from Wisconsin used ancestral hunting knowledge to kill 547 enemy soldiers. How he did it without the best equipment, without formal military training, without any of the advantages German snipers possessed. But first, we need to go back. Back before the war, before the killing, before Silas Winterhawk became Der Geist. Back to a small fishing dock on Lake Superior, where a boy learned to hunt, and where 3 Ojibwe words would change the course of military history. This story took 47 hours to research. We examined declassified military documents from the National Archives. We studied Ojibwe tribal records. We reviewed German casualty reports captured after the war. We interviewed descendants of men who served alongside Silas Winterhawk. If you value deep investigations into forgotten military innovations, hit that subscribe button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with people who understand that sometimes the most powerful weapons come from the most unexpected places. From traditions that existed long before modern warfare, from knowledge that survives because it works. Now, let's get back to Silas Winterhawk and the 3 words that made him invisible. Lake Superior, summer of 1909. Silas Winterhawk was 8 years old. The fishing dock extended 30 feet into water, so clear you could see bottom at 15 feet. His grandfather stood beside him, 72 years old, hands weathered from 6 decades of working nets and traps, eyes that could spot a deer at 400 yards without magnification. They weren't fishing that morning, they were hunting. His grandfather pointed across the lake, the opposite shore, maybe 300 yards away, dense pine forest meeting rocky beach. "You see the deer?" Silas squinted, saw nothing. Trees, rocks, morning shadows. "No, grandfather." "That's because you're looking, not seeing." His grandfather handed him the old rifle, a Winchester lever-action, 30-30 caliber. The rifle had belonged to Silas's great-grandfather, had killed deer for 3 generations. The deer is there, behind the third pine from the left. You can't see it because it doesn't want to be seen, but I can see it because I know the 3 principles. Silas stared harder, still nothing. Then his grandfather spoke 3 words, 3 Ojibwe words that Silas would carry for the rest of his life. Gijik, Bangi Igade, Minawani Goziwin. Patience, invisibility, respect. The first principle is Gijik, patience. Most hunters wait 30 minutes, get bored, move, make noise. The deer hears them, runs. They go home empty-handed. But the Ojibwe hunter? We wait. 3 hours, 6 hours, all day if necessary. The prey always reveals itself. Always. You just have to wait longer than they expect. His grandfather's hand rested on Silas's shoulder, gentle, firm. The second principle is Bangi Igade, invisibility. Not magic, not tricks. You become part of the forest. No sound, no smell, no movement. The deer looks at you and sees a tree stump, a rock, nothing that threatens. You're not hiding from the deer. You're becoming invisible by belonging to the forest. Silas watched the tree line, still saw nothing. The third principle is Minawani Goziwin, respect for the prey. When you take a shot, it must be clean. 1 bullet, 1 kill. No suffering, no wasted shots. You honor the deer by ending its life quickly. If you miss, you have dishonored the hunt. The deer gave you a chance. You failed to respect that gift. Then his grandfather pointed again, and this time, Silas saw it. The deer, standing behind the third pine, perfectly still, had been there the entire time, watching them, unafraid because it didn't recognize them as threats. Now you see, that deer has been watching us for 20 minutes. We've been standing here talking. It doesn't fear us because we haven't moved aggressively. We haven't made threatening sounds. We've been patient. We've been invisible. And now, if we needed food, we could take the shot. His grandfather didn't fire. Didn't need to. The lesson wasn't about killing. The lesson was about seeing. These 3 principles kept our people alive for 10,000 years, before guns, before metal, before white men came with their noise and their hurry and their disrespect. We survived because we understood patience, invisibility, and respect. Remember these words, Silas. They will serve you all your life. Silas remembered, especially 6 years later, when patience, invisibility, and respect would be the only things keeping him alive in a war he didn't start, fighting for a country that didn't recognize him as a citizen. Lake Superior, Wisconsin, summer of 1914. Silas Winterhawk was 23 years old. He stood on the same fishing dock where his grandfather had taught him to hunt. But his grandfather was gone now, passed 2 winters ago, left Silas with the Winchester rifle and 3 Ojibwe words. The newspaper in Silas's hands carried headlines about Europe, war, Archduke assassinated, Germany invading Belgium, France and Britain joining the fight, a white man's war, over borders and treaties and alliances that meant nothing to Silas Winterhawk, nothing to the Ojibwe people. His people had their own battles, against the American government that had forced them onto reservations, that had banned their language, that had tried to erase their culture, that refused to recognize them as full citizens. Silas couldn't vote, couldn't own land outside the reservation, faced discrimination in every town, was called savage, primitive, less than human. And now that same government wanted him to fight. Recruitment posters had appeared in town, Uncle Sam pointing, "Your country needs you. Defend democracy. Fight for freedom." Freedom. The word tasted bitter. Silas had no freedom, no rights, no voice. But he could die for America. That much they'd allow. He should have walked away, should have said no, let the white men fight their white war. But something in Silas Winterhawk burned, a quiet rage, a desperate need to prove something. If he fought, if he served, if he showed them that Ojibwe warriors were as brave as any white soldier, maybe then they'd see. Maybe then they'd recognize his people as equals. Maybe then the discrimination would end. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. On August 14th, 1914, Silas Winterhawk walked into the recruitment office in Superior, Wisconsin, 2 weeks after war was declared. The recruiting sergeant looked up, saw Silas, saw his skin, his features, his braided hair. "We ain't hiring laborers, boy." "I'm here to enlist." The sergeant laughed. "You? You know how to follow orders? You Indians ain't exactly known for discipline." Silas set the newspaper on the desk, pointed to the headline. "Says here America needs soldiers. I can shoot, I can track, I can survive in conditions that would kill most white men. You need those skills or not?" The sergeant studied him, skeptical, but recruitment numbers were low. They needed bodies. "You ever fired a rifle?" "Since I was 8. "Army rifle's different than hunting rabbits, boy." "I don't hunt rabbits. I hunt deer, at 300 yards, one shot, never miss." That got the sergeant's attention. "Never miss?" "Never." The sergeant stood, walked to the back room, returned with a Springfield rifle and a target, led Silas outside to a makeshift range. 400 yards, center mass. Let's see what you got, Chief." Silas didn't correct the slur, didn't argue, just took the rifle, felt its weight. Heavier than the Winchester, different balance. But the fundamentals were the same. Breathe slowly, squeeze gently, account for wind and distance. Wait for the moment when everything aligns. Gizik, patience. He fired once. The sergeant looked through binoculars, looked at Silas, looked through the binoculars again. Dead center, 400 yards, first shot. Silas handed back the rifle. "Do I meet your requirements?" The sergeant stared at him. "You're in. Report Monday for training." Silas signed the papers, became Private Silas Winterhawk, United States Army, 1st Battalion, would ship to England in 4 weeks. He walked out of that office believing he'd made the right choice, believing that service would earn respect, believing that fighting for America would prove his people's worth. The irony would haunt him for the rest of his life. That he killed 547 Germans to defend a country that treated Germans better than it treated him. But that realization came later, in March of 1919, when he returned home and discovered the bitter truth. For now, in August of 1914, Silas Winterhawk believed in something. Believed that courage could change minds. Believed that blood spilled in service would wash away prejudice. He believed in a lie. But sometimes lies are the only thing that keep you alive long enough to learn the truth. February 1915, Flanders, Belgium, the Western Front. Silas Winterhawk got his first look at modern warfare and realized immediately that nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. The trenches were scars carved into Belgian earth, zigzagging lines that stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. 450 miles of mud and barbed wire and death. The smell hit first. Unwashed bodies packed together, rotting corpses in no man's land, overflowing latrines, poison gas residue, cordite from constant artillery, a stench so overwhelming that new soldiers vomited. That stayed in your clothes, your hair, your skin. The noise came second. Artillery bombardment that never stopped. German shells screaming overhead, American guns answering, machine gun fire rattling like industrial machinery, screams, always screams, men dying, men wounded, men losing their minds. And the mud, everywhere, clinging, consuming. Soldiers drowned in it during heavy rain, others lost boots and had to walk barefoot. The mud was alive, malevolent, it pulled at you, tried to drag you down. This was industrial warfare, fought with machines, with chemical weapons, with tactics designed to feed men into a grinding mechanism that processed human beings into corpses. Silas's first week in the trenches, he watched 73 American soldiers die. 73 men who'd been alive Monday morning, who'd eaten breakfast, who'd written letters home, who'd made plans for after the war. By Sunday, they were bodies. Most killed by German snipers, men who died because they stood up in the wrong place, because they moved at the wrong time,
because they exposed themselves for 3 seconds too long.
The American soldiers had bolt-action rifles, good rifles, Springfield Model 1903s, accurate to 600 yards in trained hands, but no magnification, no scopes, iron sights only. The Germans had Zeiss optics, professional training, years of experience. They operated at ranges where Americans couldn't see them, couldn't return fire, could only die. And die they did. Silas watched it happen, learned the patterns, studied how the Germans operated, where they positioned, when they fired, what mistakes Americans made that got them killed. On his 8th day in the trenches, Silas's commanding officer called him to the dugout. A captain, maybe 35, West Point graduate, professional soldier. "Winterhawk, says here you're a hunter. That true?" "Yes, sir." "Says you shot expert during training, perfect score. That true too?" "Yes, sir." "We need snipers, designated marksmen, men who can engage German shooters at range. Command thinks you might have the skills. You interested?" Silas looked at the captain. "I can shoot. I can track. I can find targets that don't want to be found. Is that what you need?" "That's exactly what we need." The captain handed him a rifle, Springfield with a Warner and Swayze scope, magnification, range estimation, professional equipment. German snipers are killing 5 to 10 of our men every day, every single day. We can't sustain those losses. We need someone who can hunt them, find them, kill them. Can you do that? Silas took the rifle, felt its weight, looked through the scope. The magnification brought distant objects close, made the invisible visible. He thought about his grandfather, about 3 Ojibwe words, about 10,000 years of hunting tradition that had nothing to do with wars between white nations. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good. You start in 48 hours. Report to the forward observation post at 0400 on March 16th. We'll brief you on known German positions. After that, you're on your own. Hunt however you hunt. We don't care about methods, we care about results." That night, Silas lay in his bedroll. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind worked through what was about to begin. In 48 hours, he would take his first shot as a designated marksman, would kill his first man as something new, something the Germans would learn to fear, something that existed in the space between American doctrine and ancient Ojibwe wisdom. He thought about the deer behind the third pine, about his grandfather's patient teaching, about 3 principles that had kept his people alive for 10,000 years. Those principles were about to be tested in ways his grandfather never imagined. Tested not against deer in Wisconsin forests, but against professional German soldiers in Belgian mud. Tomorrow he'd prepare his equipment, study the maps, learn the terrain, and the day after tomorrow, Private Silas Winterhawk would become something else. Something that moved through no man's land like smoke, that killed without warning, that vanished without trace. Der Geist was about to be born, the ghost who would haunt German trenches for 3 years, the hunter who would kill 547 men and never be seen. The fisherman from Lake Superior was ending. The deadliest American sniper in history was beginning. But tonight, for the last time, Silas Winterhawk was still just a young man from Wisconsin, still carried the belief that this war had meaning, still thought that proving himself in combat would change how America saw his people. That innocence wouldn't survive the first week of hunting. But for now, on this February night in 1915, Silas still believed in something. Tomorrow, he'd learn to kill, and that knowledge would never leave him. Not when the war ended, not when he went home, not even when he died 37 years later, carrying the weight of 547 souls he'd sent to their graves. The ghost was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. March 18th, 1915. Forward observation post, American sector. Silas Winterhawk lay motionless in a shell crater. Had been there since 4 in the morning. It was now noon. 8 hours. No movement, no food, no water, just waiting. 5 days ago, his captain had assigned him as a designated marksman. 5 days ago, he'd taken the scoped rifle and promised results. In those 5 days, he'd killed 3 German soldiers. 3 careful shots, 3 confirmed kills. But Silas knew those were just the beginning. The warm-up, the testing phase. Now, he was ready for something more difficult, more important, more dangerous. His first 5 days had taught him something crucial.
The German snipers were good, professional, disciplined. They followed doctrine, changed positions every 12 minutes, rotated duties, maintained strict fire discipline. But they followed patterns, and patterns could be learned. Silas had watched them, studied them, mapped their movements in his mind. The Germans rotated between 4 positions, 12 minutes at each, 48 minutes total, then they'd repeat. Most American counter-snipers tried to outshoot the Germans. Faster, more aggressive, more bullets downrange. They died. Silas didn't try to outshoot them. He simply waited longer than they expected anyone to wait. Kijik, the first principle. At 12:17 in the afternoon, a German soldier appeared, 700 yards away, standing in a trench, scanning the American lines through binoculars. Wrong position, wrong time according to the pattern. That meant this wasn't a sniper. This was an officer, checking conditions, making decisions. Silas aimed, calculated wind, adjusted for distance, 700 yards. The bullet would drop 31 inches. Wind from the left meant 6 inches of drift. He squeezed. The Springfield cracked. 700 yards away, the German officer fell. Silas worked the bolt, chambered another round, remained motionless. No celebration, no satisfaction, just confirmation. The target was down, the threat eliminated. His 4th kill as a sniper. Clean, professional, necessary. And Silas Winterhawk felt nothing.
That absence of feeling should have worried him, should have triggered some recognition that he was changing, becoming something different from the fisherman who'd left Lake Superior 8 months ago. But there was no time for self-reflection. The war didn't care about his psychology. The war only measured results. By the end of March, Silas had 10 confirmed kills. By mid-April, 23. Each one the same, patient, calculated, no wasted ammunition.
No unnecessary risks. His commanders noticed, started giving him more autonomy, more freedom to hunt however he needed to hunt. Because Silas Winterhawk delivered results. Then came April 22nd, the day the war changed forever, the day the Germans released the gas. Second Battle of Ypres, 4:30 in the afternoon. Silas was in an advanced position, 200 yards ahead of the main American line, observing, waiting for targets. He saw the gas before he understood what it was. A greenish-yellow cloud rolling across no man's land, moving with the wind, coming toward him. He'd heard rumors, whispers about German chemical weapons, but seeing it was different. The cloud moved like something alive, purposeful, hungry. The screaming started. French colonial troops in the sector north of the American position, men who'd been hit first, men who were breathing the gas, chlorine, burning lungs, drowning on dry land, death in 4 minutes. Silas had seconds to react. Most soldiers ran, fled in panic, created gaps in the line that the Germans exploited. But Silas remembered his training, the improvised protection. He grabbed his handkerchief, found his canteen, urinated on the cloth, held it over his nose and mouth. The ammonia in urine neutralized chlorine, crude, disgusting, but effective. The gas cloud reached him, rolled over his position. He could taste metal, feel his eyes burning, his vision blurred. But the wet cloth protected his lungs. And Silas Winterhawk stayed in position,
watching through watering eyes, watching what happened next. The Germans advanced behind the gas, infantry in gas masks, confident, expecting to find dead or incapacitated defenders. They found Silas instead. He fired methodically, working the bolt action with practiced speed, dropping targets, one after another. The Germans couldn't see him through the gas, couldn't locate the source of the firing. They just saw their men falling. Panic spread through the German advance. They'd expected easy occupation, found resistance instead, fell back. Silas fired 60 rounds during that attack. Later estimates suggested he'd killed or wounded at least 20 German soldiers personally, slowed their advance enough that reinforcements could arrive. But what happened during the gas attack taught Silas something more valuable than tactical success. It taught him the second principle, in a way his grandfather never imagined.
Bangiigade, invisibility. Not physical invisibility, strategic invisibility. The Germans couldn't see him during the gas attack because he was where no one expected him to be, doing what no one expected him to do, staying when everyone else ran. He'd become invisible by violating their assumptions. His grandfather had taught him to become invisible by becoming part of the forest, by belonging so completely to the environment that prey animals looked at him and saw nothing threatening. Silas realized the same principle applied to human warfare. You became invisible not by hiding, but by being where the enemy's doctrine said you couldn't be, by doing what their training said was impossible. That night, back in the American trenches, his captain recommended him for decoration, the military medal, for courage under fire, for effectiveness in combat. Silas didn't care about medals. The medal didn't matter. The lesson mattered. The realization that German tactical doctrine was a map, and if you understood the map, you could exist in the spaces between their expectations. You could be invisible while standing in plain sight, because they weren't looking for you there. 200 miles away, in a German command post, Hauptmann Otto Steiner sat reading casualty reports. 34 years old, veteran of the Eastern Front, commander of German counter-sniper operations. The reports troubled him. American casualties from German snipers had dropped significantly. Instead, German casualties had increased. 4 dozen confirmed kills in 2 months, all at extended range, all professionally executed, all attributed to American sniper activity. But the reports were wrong. Steiner could see what his subordinates couldn't. This wasn't multiple snipers. This was one man. The kill locations created a pattern. A single operational area, consistent methodology, similar ranges and angles. One shooter, moving between positions faster than German doctrine said was possible, taking shots from ranges that American equipment supposedly couldn't reach, vanishing before counter-sniper teams could respond. Steiner studied the casualty reports, noted times, locations, conditions, started building a profile. The American sniper operated alone. No spotter, no support team. He moved during times when visibility was poor. Dawn, dusk, weather conditions. He took single shots. Never follow-up rounds. Never gave away his position through repetition. This was someone with exceptional fieldcraft, professional-level discipline, and most disturbing, someone who understood German tactics well enough to exploit their weaknesses. Steiner made a note in his journal. Unknown American sniper, operating in Ypres sector, estimated 40+ kills. Recommend priority counter-sniper operations. This individual must be identified and eliminated. He didn't know the American's name, didn't know he was Ojibwe, didn't know about 3 principles that came from 10,000 years of hunting tradition. But Steiner knew the American was good, exceptional, and therefore a threat that required personal attention. Eventually. Summer, 1916. The Somme. Industrial warfare at its most brutal. 60,000 British casualties on the first day, 20,000 dead, the bloodiest day in British military history. The Americans came into the battle in September, thrown into attacks that ground forward meter by meter, each meter purchased with hundreds of lives. Silas Winterhawk fought in the Somme, but differently than most infantry. While battalions charged German positions in waves, Silas worked between the attacks, hunting, eliminating the German gunners who made each assault a slaughter. He'd identify a machine gun position, study it for hours, sometimes days, learn the crew rotation, the blind spots, the angles of fire. Then he'd move, slowly, patiently, using shell craters and wreckage for cover, getting close, close enough that his shots were certain. The machine gun crews never saw him coming. One moment they were firing at American troops, the next, the gunner was dead. Then the loader, then the officer directing fire. By the time the Germans realized they were under attack, Silas was gone, vanished into no man's land, already moving to the next position. By summer's end, 50 Germans had died by his rifle. By autumn, 75 souls sent home in coffins. By the end of 1916, 100 confirmed kills. The numbers became abstract, less connected to individual moments, more a general tally of effectiveness. He'd stopped thinking about each German as a person. They were targets, threats to be eliminated, obstacles preventing American advance. This psychological distancing was necessary, had to be necessary, because if he thought too deeply about what he was doing, he'd break. He'd lose the ability to function. So Silas Winterhawk built walls in his mind, compartmentalized, put the killing in one box, put his humanity in another, kept them separate. It worked, for a while, until the day he found the photograph. April 1917, Vimy Ridge. The proving ground where Americans would demonstrate they were elite troops capable of accomplishing what others had failed to achieve. His mission was different from the assault troops. He was to advance ahead of the main waves, eliminate German observation posts, kill snipers who could disrupt the attack. The night before the assault, Silas moved into no man's land with 2 other scouts. They crawled through mud and wire, reached a shell crater 200 yards from German forward positions, settled in, waited. The bombardment started at 5:30. Thousands of artillery pieces firing simultaneously. The noise so overwhelming that Silas felt it through his body rather than hearing it. The ground shook. The air pressure changed. He watched through the smoke for German survivors, men who'd emerged from deep bunkers to man defensive positions. There, a machine gun crew, 4 men, working frantically to set up their weapon, to get it operational before American troops arrived. Silas aimed at the gunner, the most critical target. Fired. The German fell. The loader grabbed the gun, tried to take over. Silas fired again. The loader dropped. The remaining crew members dove for cover. Smart. Survival instinct. But now the machine gun sat abandoned. Useless. Silas waited. Knew they'd have to retrieve the weapon or face punishment from their officers for abandoning position. One German emerged, cautious, reaching for the gun. Silas fired. The German collapsed. The last crew member fled, ran, left the gun behind. That machine gun should have killed dozens of American soldiers. Instead, it sat silent, neutralized, because Silas Winterhawk understood the third principle in a way that changed everything. Minawa anigoziwin. Respect. But not respect as his grandfather meant it. Not honoring the prey through clean kills. Something different, something tactical. Silas respected the machine gun crew's training, respected their instinct to retrieve the weapon, respected their fear of abandoning their post, used that respect to predict their behavior, to know exactly when and where they'd expose themselves. You couldn't kill what you didn't understand, and you couldn't understand what you didn't respect. The German soldiers weren't inferior, weren't stupid. They were professionals following professional doctrine. Their training was excellent, their equipment superior to American gear. But Silas respected them enough to learn their doctrine, to study their training, to understand how they thought. And that respect made him more dangerous than any American sniper who dismissed the Germans as simple enemies. Silas operated through Vimy Ridge for 3 days, 15 confirmed kills during the battle itself. By the time the ridge was taken, his total count had reached 138. 138 men who'd had lives, families, reasons for being here that probably mirrored his own. Soldiers following orders, believing in something. That evening, after Vimy Ridge was secured, Silas sat in a captured German bunker, alone, surrounded by abandoned equipment, German maps, German rations, German personal effects left behind in the evacuation. He picked up a German soldier's diary, leather-bound, well-worn, opened to a random page. The entry was dated April 3rd, 2 weeks ago, written in German that Silas couldn't fully read, but he recognized enough words.
Mutter, mother. Heim, home. Angst, fear. This German soldier had been afraid, missing home, thinking about his mother. Human, just like Silas. And then Silas found the photograph, tucked in the diary, carefully preserved between pages. A German lieutenant, maybe 30 years old, standing with a woman, his wife. Two small girls, maybe 4 and 6 years old, all smiling, standing in front of a farmhouse. Bavaria, probably. Mountains in the background, peace in their faces. The lieutenant in the photograph looked happy, looked like he belonged somewhere other than a war, looked like someone who should have lived. Silas stared at the photograph. This lieutenant was probably dead now, killed during the bombardment, or during the assault, or maybe by one of Silas's bullets. Somewhere in Bavaria, a woman would receive a telegram. Your husband was killed in action at Vimy Ridge, died serving the fatherland. She'd never know the details. Never know if it was artillery or bullets or gas. Never know if he died instantly or suffered. Never know that an Ojibwe fisherman from Wisconsin might have been the one who pulled the trigger. For the first time since he'd started killing, Silas Winterhawk felt the weight of what he was doing. Felt it fully. Not abstract, not distant, real. 138 confirmed kills. 138 men who'd had lives, families, reasons for being here that probably mirrored his own. Soldiers following orders, believing in something. He kept the photograph, put it in his pocket, carried it with him, looked at it every night before sleep. The photograph haunted him, reminded him that the Germans weren't just targets, weren't just enemy combatants, were human beings with families who loved them, with children who'd grow up without fathers. But the war didn't care. The war kept grinding, kept demanding kills, kept measuring success in body counts, and Silas Winterhawk kept killing, because that was his job. That was what his country asked of him. That was the price of trying to prove his people deserved respect. He just carried the weight now, carried it every day, every night, every kill. The photograph of a German lieutenant and his family, a reminder that respect meant understanding the cost, not just to yourself, but to everyone the war touched. 138 kills, 138 families, 138 costs that could never be repaid. And the war wasn't even close to over. Between Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele, 5 months passed. May, June, July, August, September of 1917. Silas's notebook recorded the progression. 127 kills at Vimy became 143 by May's end, 168 by July, 194 by August, each month bringing new battles, new German positions to scout, new targets to eliminate, new deaths to carry. By the time his battalion received orders for Passchendaele in late September, Silas Winterhawk had killed 234 German soldiers. The photograph of the German lieutenant stayed in his pocket, every day, every night, removed carefully each evening, studied by candlelight, a reminder that each number in his notebook was a man, a father, a son, a human being who would never go home. But the war didn't care about photographs. The war didn't care about reminders of humanity. The war only cared about body counts, about ground gained, about enemies eliminated. And the war was about to demand more from Silas Winterhawk than he'd yet given. Autumn, 1917. Passchendaele, hell made real. The battle was fought through Belgian fields destroyed by years of shelling. The landscape had become a swamp. Rain fell constantly. The ground couldn't drain. Artillery had pulverized earth into mud that swallowed men whole. Soldiers advanced through waist-deep muck. German machine guns cut them down. Shell craters filled with water. Men drowned in them. Wounded soldiers who fell face down suffocated before medics could reach them. Casualties were catastrophic. Gains measured in yards. Each yard purchased with dozens of lives. Silas operated in conditions designed to make sniping impossible, moving quietly through sucking mud, finding cover in flat terrain, taking precise shots while soaked and shivering, He adapted,
used shell craters as firing positions, timed movements to German artillery patterns, learned to shoot in rain and fog. Between October and early November, his kill count climbed steadily. 234 became 250, then 270, then 290. Each number another German who would never see home. Another telegram sent to Bavaria or Prussia or wherever Germans buried their war dead. Another family destroyed by this endless, grinding war. And then came November 2nd, the day everything changed. A German officer, directing artillery fire, exposed for 15 seconds. Silas took the shot. Clean kill. Professional. Efficient. Kill number 300. Silas sat in his muddy crater, stared at his rifle. The weapon felt impossibly heavy. Or maybe his arms were just exhausted from holding death for 3 years. 300 men. 300 times he'd chosen to pull the trigger. 300 families receiving telegrams. 300 graves somewhere in Germany. He thought about Lake Superior, about fishing with his grandfather, about a time when killing meant hunting deer for food, when death served survival, not strategy, when taking a life required ceremony and respect and acknowledgement of cost. What had he become? This thing that moved through battlefields dealing death, this ghost that Germans feared, this machine that processed targets into corpses. His grandfather's voice echoed across 3 years and 4,000 miles. Minawa Nigoziwin. Respect for the prey. But how do you respect 300 dead men? How do you honor kills when there are too many to remember individually? When faces blur together into abstract numbers in a notebook? Silas looked at his hands, covered in mud, in blood, in the residue of 3 years of killing. "I'm not Silas Winterhawk anymore," he whispered. "I'm just death, just the thing that kills." He stayed in that crater for 6 hours, didn't move, didn't hunt, just sat with the weight of 300 souls. When he finally climbed out, returned to American lines, he was different, quieter, more distant. The other soldiers noticed but didn't ask. Everyone at Passchendaele was breaking in their own ways. The war didn't care if Silas Winterhawk was breaking. The war just needed him to keep killing. So he did, because stopping meant desertion, meant cowardice, meant execution. He'd finish what he started, kill until the war ended, or until a German bullet found him, whichever came first. But something had died at Passchendaele, something that wouldn't resurrect when peace came. The part of him that believed killing could be honorable when done for right reasons. Spring, 1918. The German Spring Offensive. Germany's final desperate gamble. They abandoned defense, attacked with new infiltration tactics, stormtroopers, elite units breaking through Allied lines. The offensive succeeded initially, pushed British and French forces back dozens of miles. American forces rushed to threatened sectors, held positions, prevented catastrophic breakthrough. Silas fought through the crisis differently than his methodical sniping. Quick shots at moving targets. Constant relocation, every minute critical. His kill count continued its inexorable climb. 350 by March, 400 by April, 450 by summer, 500 by September. The numbers meant nothing anymore, just tallies. Measurements of German soldiers eliminated, mothers who would cry, children who'd grow up fatherless, 500 dead men, and Silas Winterhawk carried every single one. By summer, the German offensive had collapsed. The Allies counterattacked. The 100 Days Offensive, the final push. And in that final campaign, Hauptmann Otto Steiner decided to personally hunt Der Geist. November 7th, 1918, 4 days before armistice. Silas was in a forward position, observing German movements. Then something changed. A feeling, instinct, the sensation of being watched. He shifted positions slowly, scanned terrain. There, 700 yards, a glint, sunlight on glass, a scope. Someone was hunting him. Silas didn't panic, applied the first principle, Gizik, patience. He moved using terrain, disappeared from the other sniper's sight line, circled, created distance. This was different from fighting regular soldiers.
This was a duel between professionals, someone who understood hunting as deeply as Silas understood hunting. For 3 days they stalked each other, neither getting clear shots, neither making mistakes, both too experienced, too careful. November 9th. The duel ended. Silas moved through a destroyed village, checking angles, and there he was, the German sniper, 50 yards away, moving between buildings. They saw each other simultaneously. Both reacted with trained speed. Both aimed. Both had clear shots. For 3 seconds they stared. Professional recognition, understanding that only one would survive. Silas fired first. Half a second faster, his bullet struck the German's shoulder, disabling but not fatal. The German dropped his rifle, fell against a wall, clutching his wound. Silas approached cautiously, rifle ready. The German could have a sidearm, could have grenades, but the German just sat bleeding, looking at Silas with eyes holding no hatred, just exhaustion, and something resembling respect. "You are der Geist," the German said in accented English. "The ghost." "Hauptmann Otto Steiner," Silas replied, recognizing the name from intelligence reports. Steiner nodded. "You've hunted well, killed many of my men. I came to stop you. Failed." Silas aimed at Steiner's head. Could end it now. One more kill. Eliminate a German officer who'd killed dozens of Allied soldiers. His finger rested on the trigger. The third principal whispered, "Minawani Goziwin," respect. "This war made us both into something we weren't meant to be," Silas said quietly. "Turned hunters into killers." Steiner's laugh was bitter. "Yes, I was a forester before the war. Hunted deer in the Black Forest. Never imagined I'd hunt men." Silas lowered his rifle. "Medic," he shouted. "Wounded prisoner." Steiner stared. "You're not going to kill me?" "War's almost over. Everyone knows armistice is coming. You're wounded, disarmed. Killing you wouldn't be combat. It would be murder." "Why do you care about the distinction?" "Because I have to live with what I've done after this war ends. Have to carry 500 kills for the rest of my life. I can choose not to make it 501. Medics came, took Steiner away. He'd survive. Return to Germany. Go back to the Black Forest and hunt deer instead of men. Silas watched him go. Wondered if mercy could somehow balance 500 deaths. It couldn't. But he tried anyway. November 10th, 1918. 3:37 in the morning. 11 hours until armistice. Silas lay in a shell crater, watching German trenches. Everyone knew the war was ending at 11 o'clock that morning. The killing should have stopped, but it hadn't. A German officer appeared, examining a map, exposed for 10 seconds. Everything in Silas screamed to let him live. The war was almost over. This man might have family. In 11 hours he'd be going home anyway. But 3 years of training overrode thought. 3 years of being der Geist. Silas aimed, calculated wind, squeezed the trigger. The German officer fell. Kill number 547. The last man Silas Winterhawk would kill in the Great War. And the most pointless. The most wasteful. The most unnecessary. 11 hours later, at precisely 11 o'clock on November 11th, the guns fell silent. The armistice had been signed. The war was over. Silas sat in the trenches, still holding his rifle. When 11 o'clock arrived, the silence was shocking. After 4 years of constant artillery and gunfire, the absence of sound felt unnatural. Men emerged from trenches. British, French, American, German, all stunned that they'd survived. Some cried, some hugged, some stared at nothing. Silas set down his rifle, looked at his hands. These hands had killed 547 men. "It's over," someone said. "We won. We're going home." Silas nodded, but felt no relief, no victory, just emptiness. The war was over. But what he'd become would never end. The ghost would follow him home. The 547 dead would follow him home. You couldn't kill 547 men and just go back to fishing. March 1919, New York Harbor. Silas stood on a transport ship deck, watching America approach. Home. The ship docked. White soldiers disembarked to cheering crowds. parades, celebrations. Welcome home, heroes!
Silas and other Native American soldiers were directed to a separate area. Processing for non-white servicemen. No crowds, no celebrations, just paperwork. On the bus to the train station, Silas saw German prisoners of war being transported to a work camp. They were given seats, given food, treated with basic respect according to Geneva Convention. Silas stood. No seats available for him. At the train station restaurant he tried to buy food, was refused service. "We don't serve Indians." He'd killed 547 Germans defending America, earned 3 medals for valor, spent 4 years fighting for freedom and democracy. And he couldn't buy a sandwich in his own country. The Germans who'd tried to kill him were treated better than he was. The irony crushed him, proved everything he'd believed about earning respect through service was a lie. America didn't care how many enemies he'd killed, didn't care about his medals. He was Native American. That meant he'd never be equal, never be respected, never be free. Not in the country he'd bled for. Silas made it back to Lake Superior, back to the fishing dock where his grandfather had taught him to hunt. But he couldn't fish anymore. The patience that let him wait 8 hours for a shot now meant sitting motionless for hours, lost in memories. The invisibility that kept him alive in no man's land now meant feeling disconnected from everyone. The respect for prey now meant seeing every person as a potential target. Nightmares came every night. 547 faces, men he'd killed, dying repeatedly. The German lieutenant with the photograph, the officer killed 11 hours before armistice, all asking why. Loud noises sent him diving for cover. 4th of July fireworks sounded like artillery. He'd hit the ground searching for threats while people stared. He drank to numb memories, to sleep without seeing the dead. It didn't work. By autumn 1919, Silas understood he'd never recover. The ghost was permanent. The fisherman from Lake Superior was dead. But then he met other Native American veterans, men who'd served, who'd suffered, who'd returned to discrimination and broken promises. Together, they found new purpose. If America wouldn't grant respect for military service, they'd fight for their rights another way, through activism, through advocacy, through organized resistance. Silas became a leader, used the same patience and discipline that made him a sniper, applied 3 principles to different warfare. Political warfare, the fight for justice. He served as chief of his Ojibwe band, fought forced assimilation, defended treaty rights, worked to preserve Ojibwe language and traditions. He rarely spoke about the war. When asked, he'd give brief answers and change subject. The medals stayed in a drawer. He didn't want to be remembered as a killer, wanted to be remembered for what he built after the war. 3 principles for hunting, 3 principles for war, 3 principles for peace. Gizik, patience in fighting for change that took decades. Bangi Igade, invisibility in working behind scenes, building movements. Minawani Goziwin, respect for all people, even those who'd oppressed his people, because respect meant understanding how to change minds. Silas Winterhawk lived until 1952, died at 61. His body, worn from 4 years of war and 33 years fighting for indigenous rights. His obituary mentioned war service and decorations, but focused on his leadership, his work preserving Ojibwe culture, his resistance against oppression. The American military barely acknowledged his death. No state funeral, no ceremony, no recognition that America had lost one of its most accomplished soldiers. He was buried near Lake Superior, a simple grave marker. No mention of 547 kills, no mention of being der Geist. For decades, Silas Winterhawk remained forgotten. Then historians researching indigenous military contributions discovered his documentation, realized they were looking at something extraordinary. Books were written. Military historians studied his techniques. Indigenous communities celebrated him. In 2008, America finally recognized Silas Winterhawk properly, posthumously inducted him into the Military Hall of Honor. In 2016, a naval vessel was named USS Winterhawk, the first American warship named after a Native American. These recognitions came too late for Silas,
but they represented America beginning to acknowledge its indigenous veterans. The three Ojibwe principles didn't die with Silas Winterhawk in 1952. Today, they're taught at every advanced warfare school in America.
Fort Benning trains snipers in patience, teaching them to wait longer than enemies expect. Exactly what Silas learned fishing with his grandfather on Lake Superior. Special Operations Forces study invisibility, not camouflage, strategic invisibility. Being where doctrine says you can't be. Doing what training says is impossible. Pure Ojibwe wisdom. Combat ethics courses teach respect for enemy combatants, understanding their tactics, their training, their humanity. Because you can't defeat what you don't understand. What an Ojibwe fisherman learned in 1909 is now standard military doctrine in 2025. 10,000 years of indigenous knowledge proved more effective than European military academies ever imagined. The ghost taught the military how to hunt. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in World War I? Do you know stories of forgotten warriors whose sacrifices deserve recognition? Hit that subscribe button. Every week, we bring you stories textbooks ignore. Stories of ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Stories proving courage comes in many forms. That innovation comes from unexpected places. That sacrifice demands respect, regardless of who makes it. To Silas Winterhawk, to every Native American veteran who fought for a country that didn't recognize their humanity. To every soldier who proved their worth on battlefields, then had to fight another war at home for basic rights. We remember, we honor, we never forget. Because some stories are too important to remain buried. Some sacrifices too great to ignore. Some lessons too valuable to lose. 3 principles, 10,000 years of tradition, 547 lives. One ghost who hunted justice long after the war ended. That's the real story of Silas Winterhawk. Not the kills, but what came after. The fight that mattered most. The legacy that endures. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for honoring these forgotten warriors. Their stories live because you're here, because you care, because you understand that history isn't just about what happened, it's about learning from what happened and making sure it never gets forgotten.